Good morning, everyone. My name is Heath Condro. I'm the principal here at Sunway International School, and I was fortunate enough to serve as the principal of Sunway International School Iskandar, our sister school down in Johor last year. We will be joined for today's presentation by a couple of the teachers that from our school in Johor that I'll do some introductions of a little bit later. This morning, just to outline a little bit of what will be happening, I'll be giving you a bit of a PowerPoint presentation just with a general overview of the Ontario or the Canadian view of kindergarten as well as elementary. Then we will have some breakout rooms where you'll have an opportunity to hear from and interact with our two teachers that are joining us from our school in Iskandar. These are two of the teachers that will be giving you some of the specifics in terms of information. I'd prefer to just give you a bit of an overview. They're the ones with the boots on the ground in the elementary classrooms, so you'll be hearing from them after me. Then we'll be coming back after the breakout rooms for a little bit of a question and answer form, which will be moderated by one of our staff here. So again, thank you everyone for taking the time to join us this morning. It's exciting having you join us for this event. As many of you know, and you've probably seen in the video that we just showed, Sunway International School KL will be moving to a brand new campus in January of 2023. And that new campus will allow us to have an elementary or primary offering. Currently, Sunway International School KL is grade 6 to grade 11 in the Ontario system, as well as grade 11 and 12 for IBDP. The new campus will allow us to have purpose-built facilities to cater to the needs of any of our younger students for elementary age. So we will have our 2-year kindergarten program, as well as grades 1 to 5, all based on the Ontario curriculum from Canada. If I use the term Canadian curriculum, what I'm really referring to is the Ontario curriculum. For those of you who are not aware, in Canada, education is a provincial jurisdiction. So British Columbia has a slightly different curriculum than Alberta and different than Ontario. So I use the terms Canadian and Ontario interchangeably, but really what I do mean is that we'll be following the Ontario model the same way as we do in our current middle school, as well as in our high school that we've been offering now for more than 14 years. All right, so I'll give you a bit of an overview. There's quite a bit of information that I want to give in terms of content. And that'll allow you to have just a little bit of a background on what the Canadian approach to education is. If you've got students and children in our school already, you're probably aware of some of the differences of the Canadian or the Ontario approach to education compared to, say, the British or the Malaysian system, maybe the Australian system. However, for those of you who are new to this sort of discussion, this will give you a bit of an overview in terms of some of the major differences or some of the main points that we want to make on how the Ontario system may be a little bit different and what we believe are the strengths of that Ontario system. So if you'll just allow me a moment to get up the PowerPoint that I can share here. I'll be sharing my screen with everybody. And we'll get going. Just a moment here, everyone. So can everyone see my full display screen? I'm assuming yes.
Yes, we can.
Unless I hear otherwise, I'll continue. Okay. So again, thank you for taking the time on a Saturday morning to join us for this information session on kindergarten and primary or elementary. I will also be using the terms primary and elementary interchangeably as well. And you know, they mean the exact same thing in our terminology. And just before we get started, if everybody would like to please keep their microphones on mute. If you have questions, please put them into the chat box. We find that that works very well. That way, if anybody comes up with a question, the entire audience online can see what that question is, as well as gives us an opportunity to make sure that we don't lose track of some of the questions. Okay, so let me get started. So first of all, I want to outline what is the role of all of our teachers, whether it's kindergarten, whether it's grade 5, whether it's grade 11. Is to make sure that we create an environment that fosters a sense of community inside the classroom, where students feel they are included and appreciated, and where perspectives are treated with respect. And this starts at kindergarten, and it's universal for all of our classes. We want teachers to select topics and resources and examples that reflect the diversity and the difference in the classroom. So for example, our teachers would be the ones who would work together to source some of our resources, whether it's novels, whether it's short stories, all of those things that that allow a teacher to create lessons that they feel can reflect that diversity and that difference in the classroom. Our curriculum outlines basic and overall expectations, as well as some specific expectations, but it's not completely prescriptive in telling teachers exactly what the resources should be used, or like I say, what novels, short stories, what experiments should be done. The teachers, in their capacity as the experts in the class, work together to determine those things. We want to make sure that we have student-centered work that is not just acknowledged, yes, you did it, but also nurtured. And I'll talk a little bit about the feedback that's important for that. And we want to make sure that that teachers facilitate learning and provide guidance and feedback for learning and improvement. It's not enough for a teacher to present 5 or 7 lessons and then just simply have an assessment at the end or the conclusion of those lessons. It's important for students to have opportunities to work with the curriculum and the content, and to work with demonstrating their learning, while also getting feedback from the teachers on ways to improve, or ways to demonstrate that they've got a deeper learning of the subject matter before they hit a final assessment. We must use a variety of instructional, assessment, and evaluation strategies. We don't just simply want to see the same paper-based test at the end of every unit. We, as teachers, always need to help students make meaningful connections. How is what we studied 4 or 5 weeks ago connected to what we're working on now? How is what I did in grade 2 math connected to what we are doing in grade 3 math, or the scaffolding, or what we would call the vertical alignment? Building on the previous connections, building on the previous content to make sure that their learning is meaningful. We want to assign tasks that promote and develop higher order thinking skills. For us, especially at the younger grades, or especially when we get students that join Sunway International School from a more traditional setting, I've always emphasized to the teachers that content is not the only priority, but having students get out of the mindset where a good student is a quiet student, where a good student is the one who can memorize and put down the same facts on a test. That's not our Canadian approach to education. Our Canadian approach to education is to try and get students to have those higher order thinking skills and get them to the point where they feel comfortable in questioning. They feel comfortable in asking for clarification. They feel comfortable in trying to establish their own connections between certain content or certain concepts. We also want students to assess their own learning. that means that it's not good enough just for a student to say, well, this is what I received for my grade, but to have follow-up conversations of how could I have done better? In what areas do I fully comprehend things, but in what areas do I still need a little bit of work? For students to self-reflect on that and assess their own learning is very, very important if we want to take them to the next level. And finally, we want to motivate students and we want them to become lifelong learners. Here we've got just a screen capture from one of the, sorry, a couple of things here on my screen. Here we've got a screen capture of 10 reasons. 10 reasons for, hold on a moment. I am having difficult, there we go. 10 reasons to use inquiry-based learning. So I'll just let you take a look at a few of these. One of the ones that stands out for me is number 5. And I'm not going to spend the time going through all of these, but this is one that I like to have discussions with students and especially parents on teaching grit, perseverance, growth mindset. I think part of our role as educators is to not only deliver content and not only help students grow, but these are the sort of lifelong skills that will help students far after they've graduated from school or university, that will help them all throughout their life. I think it is important for students to experience a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of disappointment from time to time, so that they can persevere, so that they can say, all right, I didn't do as well on that. How will I do better next time? Or they will look at something and say, that was really challenging and I was successful for this reason. And if it was really challenging, to embrace that challenge. That's really, really important. We don't want students who, the first time they come up to an obstacle or a challenge, simply wither away and give up and say, no, I can't do it. I don't want to do it. We want to create a classroom environment where they're challenged and they dive in and they take on that challenge, because that's a lifelong skill that is very, very important. And I think every parent would agree with that. We can't remove every challenge from a child's pathway. They have to encounter those challenges and they have to learn how to overcome them. So as you can see, there's a number of things on there for points that I want to draw attention to. So taking a look at our full day kindergarten at SIS-KL, what we plan, obviously our kindergarten and our elementary will be modeled on the practices that we've used and that we've refined at Sunway International School, Iskandar, using the 5 years of experience that those teachers and that administration have built over the past number of years. Which is why we have the 2 teachers joining us today for our breakout rooms. But looking at the full day kindergarten at SIS-KL, we want play and academic work to not be distinct categories, especially when we're talking about kindergarten. This is where we want students to be playing in order to be learning. The Ontario model involves new curriculum with play and inquiry-based approach to learning. So I want to ensure that any parents that are listening are not focusing on that word play. I want you to understand that play is intricately linked with the inquiry-based approach to learning. And this inquiry-based approach to learning is something that is present in all of the Ontario approach to education. Kindergarten should not be about a teacher standing at the front and it being teacher-centered. And any class in our Ontario curriculum, it should not be completely teacher-centered. Rote learning, no. There are things where students need to do some memorization and some rote learning. I grant you that. Not all life is about play. Memorizing your times tables, memorizing the periodic table in chemistry. Those things, yes, they can be rote learning. But when we're talking about more meaningful connections in learning, we want to get away from the rote learning and the memorization. And we want students to be involved in their own learning and their inquiry-based approach to learning. So we have an Ontario model for kindergarten, which is 2 years, full day, beginning at the age 4, and allowing students essentially to prepare for the grade 1 curriculum and their move into elementary. And it's always fascinating for me as someone who has a high school background. And majority of my teaching has been middle school and high school. And talking to Sarah and Chandra, our 2 teachers from Iskandar, the other day, just hearing the importance of how different kindergarten is compared to grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. These are things that even myself as an educator always find that I'm learning. And my year that I spent working with these individuals down in Iskandar at the school in Iskandar was very, very valuable. And it reinforced to me that even though I've got 20 plus years and I've been in several different roles at different ages, primarily middle and high school, even I need to be open to the differences of kindergarten and elementary and the importance of having good experienced teachers in those roles. So let's look at this. Parent comes home, parent picks up the child and says, "What did you do at school today?" Child says, "We played." Parent thinks, "Is my child just playing all day?" Which is a good question. And for the most part, the answer should be in kindergarten, yes. But let me explain just a little bit. For children at that age, and I certainly don't want to go into the developmental psychology aspect of this, but children at that age learn through play. And I am certain that any of you who have had children at that age have watched them at times problem solving on their own, cooperating with other individuals, doing things which, as an observer, is really quite fascinating. And we want our students working with the teachers and playing with the teachers to have a number of different connections established every day through their use of play in the classroom. And I'll talk a little bit more about why it's structured play. So when we talk about learning centers, I don't mean learning centers in the traditional Malaysian sense. I mean learning centers within the kindergarten classroom, okay, or play centers, where there are specifically chosen materials, specifically chosen tasks that will help students get through and experience certain aspects. These learning centers are planned and implemented for the purpose of exploring new ideas and concepts, for helping provide instruction, and giving them time to practice any of their previous learning. And when they're at these stations or when they're at these centers, children learning through play make their own inquiries. They may be working or playing with another student and seeing the way one student uses certain manipulatives or physical things that are at the PlayStation. Just that observation of another student may be a way for them to make those connections. And it's one of those things where they don't even realize that they're learning. They're just playing. But the most effective learning is the learning that happens when a student isn't aware that they're learning and they're just experiencing it. So I got a few pictures here of our classrooms in Sunway International School, Iskandar. As you can see, it's very active learning with students taking the opportunity to be working at various workstations, doing different tasks, whether that's individual based, whether that's group based or pair based. obviously in the last couple of years, we've had to adjust and make sure that the environment is a safe one for students to learn. But it should never be done in isolation entirely. It should be times where students are learning how to work with a partner, how they're learning to work with another group. And when we talk about some of the skills that are emphasized in middle school and high school, one of those skills is collaboration, meaning how are they working and learning with others. And this collaboration starts much, much earlier than middle school and high school. It starts in the kindergarten and the elementary age. Here we've got more areas where the kids are learning. They may be counting. They may be doing something that requires fine motor skills. They may be doing something that requires them to present to others, or they may be doing something that's outside. If we're able to provide those facilities for the students, for them to be in a different environment, doing something different. And it's not just play. I want to emphasize that it's play with purpose. So we've got here's an instance or a few instances where students are actually engaged in mathematical learning, where they're sorting or they're exploring or they're working with shapes as an introduction to geometry. So the play is designed with purpose. We've also got literacy as well. So again, where we've got students that are actively playing with manipulatives, whether they are on the floor or whether they're magnets on the whiteboard, where a student is playing, but they're also learning certain aspects of literacy, verbally and non-verbally, and where students are now at a point where they're learning to present, where they're standing in front of their peers, in front of the classroom, in order to expand their demonstration of their learning. The curriculum is designed with various aspects of this screen capture is obviously a health lesson and body parts, where students have certain manipulatives that they've been working with, projects, but again, this is play designed with purpose. And the learning methods that the teachers will be using, especially in kindergarten, but also into the other elementary, are not just go to the learning station and play. There is certain aspects of it which are exploration based, where kids are exploring and they're learning things from an exploration background. There's also guided instruction, where things are a little bit more planned out by the teachers and the educational assistant. It may still be play-based activities, but it's designed with a specific goal in mind, as well as there are times, even within kindergarten, where we are having students be part of explicit instruction, which is direct instruction from the teacher or the educational assistants. So if we look at grades 1 to 5 in the Ontario curriculum, we've got our language, mathematics, science and technology, social studies, as well as the arts, and physical education and health. So these Ontario curriculum documents are available online to anybody, and they're public documents, and it outlines the exact overall learning expectations as well as the specific learning expectations. And one of the things that our campus in Iskandar has really excelled in, which we plan on using as well, is digital literacy and what is needed. Looking at RAS Kids is literacy based. And I know that there are a number of other international schools in Malaysia that use RAS Kids. A lot of other international schools will be using Seesaw. Seesaw was something that that had quite significant growth with the very first lockdown that happened in March, April, and May of 2020, with many schools taking on Seesaw, because those students that are at a younger age just simply aren't at the ability where they can use Google Classroom. And I've got a caption here on Google Classroom, which is generally what our grade 4, grade 5, and certainly grade 6 and up students would be using with their parents as well as with their teachers. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about Seesaw, BrainPop, RazKids, please ask Chandra and Sarah. So looking at our assessment in the Canadian or the elementary primary, the purpose of assessment is to improve student learning and to drive teacher instruction. And this is fairly universal across all of the grades. If I am a teacher of a grade 7 class, my instructional practice should be partially driven by how my students are being assessed and their level of achievement in those assessments and evaluations. We also believe that assessment is not a one-time event. So for any of you that have visited our SIS open days in the past, you will probably have heard me say this many times. I don't believe that students should be assessed and be given any sort of a grade or level of achievement based on a one-time event. I believe that students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning, and I believe that students should have multiple ways of demonstrating their learning. The teacher should use different and various methods of assessment. In the Ontario vernacular, we use assessment for and assessment of, but essentially assessment for is like formative assessment, where students have the opportunity to demonstrate their learning and receive feedback from the teacher in ways so that they understand how to improve, or that they understand ways that or areas that they may need to improve upon. If a student just simply sits down and writes a test, they might write a test and think, oh, I did so well, I knew everything. And in some areas, they may be completely off the mark. And it's not really fair to have a summative assessment when you a student hasn't had the opportunity to get feedback from the teacher on those certain areas. So students should have unit tests. They should have projects. They should have writing assignments. They should have rubrics, and those rubrics spell out not just the levels of achievement, but how a student can achieve those certain levels, or what are the expectations in achieving those levels. Empowering student learning and teacher mobility. And I added teacher mobility specifically in this. One of the things that from time to time, whether it's at our Canadian pre-U, whether it's Canadian grade 11 or grade 7, one of the things that always challenges me in terms of my patients is being called a lecturer. I'm not a lecturer, I'm a teacher. There's a huge difference. A lecturer stands at the front. A teacher is mobile. They engage with students. And if I'm ever walking around the school, I want to see our teachers engaged. I want to see the teachers going around and talking to students and giving them feedback. And I want them to be mobile. I want them to be, if a teacher is engaged with the students, they should be moving around. They should be active. Okay, we want students to be the primary thinkers in the classroom, and we want them to provide the dynamics of learning within the class. So we want learning activities and resources that should be inclusive in nature. They should reflect a range of experiences of the students and their backgrounds, their abilities, their interests, and their learning styles, because every student Every student is unique. Every student is different. Every student brings different prior learning, different learning styles, different backgrounds to the classroom. And we want to enable students to become more sensitive to diverse cultures and the perceptions of others. So why would we choose the Canadian curriculum, and why does it work internationally? Because the Ontario or the Canadian curriculum is flexible and adaptive. And I spoke a little bit about that earlier when I talked about the teachers having the ability to choose some of the activities and some of the resources for reaching the overall and the specific learning goals. And the Canadian curriculum should help build upon students' prior knowledge, interests, and strengths, and their learning styles, as I was just speaking about. And we want to ensure that the lessons and the classroom experience engages a broad range of learners. One teacher with one style is not going to reach all 24 or 25 students in the classroom. We want them to use varied styles. We want them to use different approaches. And having said that, we also want students to feel comfortable enough to raise their hand or talk to their teacher and say, I just don't understand. And if they don't understand, that the teacher takes a different approach or an individual approach with that student to help them make that meaningful connection. So at this point, I'm going to turn over to our breakout rooms. We've got two of our teachers that are joining us. We have our elementary coordinator, Ms. Sarah Keddy, who will be joining us, as well as one of our longer serving staff members down in our school in Iskandar, Ms. Chandra van Mollendorf. And at this time, I believe I'm going to turn over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will be turning over to them and the breakout rooms.